begin by thanking our amazing choir, our choir director, our musicians, absolutely. Of course, Alex at the keyboard, who does such a beautiful job, and Eddie, who arranges everything for us to enjoy this experience. Thank you very much. So let me begin by saying good morning.
Good morning.
Let's stick with good morning. It has to work for the sermon, so good morning. You know, it's actually a really interesting phrase when you say good morning, because there's an assumption made when you use that phrase. Is it really a good morning, or is it a lousy morning? Did we rise on the right side of the bed or the wrong side of the bed? Every morning when we wake up, a new day arises, and we have a whole set of choices before us. How is it that we decide what kind of day we're going to have? How is it that we're going to approach life with a certain attitude? I suppose the answers to those questions depend on one's life experiences, one's present place in life, and what lies ahead in the future. I suppose it's an assumption to say, what side of the bed did you wake up on? For many in our society do not even have a bed. Not so fortunate to have a left or a right side, or a bad or a good side to wake up upon. They just want a bed, while we complain about what side we woke up on. There are very few events in world history that I can think of that every human being on the face of the earth experienced at the same time. COVID-19 was one of those experiences in which every human being on this planet had to, in one way or another, deal with. Leaving the actual biology of the virus aside, the trauma of the pandemic was one that hit each of us. How each of us dealt with it and now deal with it. It is an amazing opportunity at such a time of reflection like Rosh Hashanah to ask ourselves, what have we learned from our own human nature given the trauma of COVID? For many of us, we were indeed able to see the silver lining of COVID-19, and we're able to count our blessings. The blessing of focusing on family, the blessing of taking the opportunity to learn more online, the blessing of drilling down on that which was essential in our lives. We really did learn how to count our blessings. Our theme for this year at Temple is broaden your blessings. To take our life and not just drill down on blessings, but drill up and out so that we can view the beauty of the world and see that which we have never seen before. To have the ability to see humanity, each other, nature, and the essence of what is so good about our world instead of focusing only on the negative. In one way or another, COVID and its related variants will be with us for a very long time to come. And so too can be our attitude towards how we handle such moments, not only in crisis, but in stability. Broadening our blessings can be a mantra by which to live a more meaningful and more spiritual life. There's a famous story that Rabbi King, may he rest in peace, used to tell all the time about the parting of the Red Sea that I'll share with you now. The miracle of the parting of the Red Sea is a quintessential moment in the Jewish mindset. The Midrash, the Jewish legends, tell us that two Israelites, Reuven and Shimon, who were part of this great miracle, never really appreciated or experienced the joy before them. Apparently, even though the water had drawn back from the sea, the bottom of the sea was still muddy. Makes sense. Reuven stepped into the mud and sneered, "What is this muck?" Shimon scowled, "There's mud all over the place." "What's the difference?" complained Shimon. "Mud here, mud there. It's all the same, dirt everywhere." Because they never once looked up, they never understood why those who had gone ahead of them were singing and dancing on the opposite shore. For Reuven and Shimon, the miracle of the escape of Egypt through the Red Sea never happened. I can tell you unequivocally, doing my job for almost 3 decades now, that life is not predictable, that life is full of challenges and obstacles, and if that is all one ever focuses on, keeping their head in the mud, then that's all they will ever see. Religion, faith, and Judaism is all about helping us look to the horizon to appreciate and celebrate life. Judaism is life-affirming at its core. The Jewish New Year reminds us to lift our heads high, to stand up straight, and to embrace the fullness that life has to offer. That being said, I have to say that I was saddened that the world did not unify through COVID. What an opportunity for us to come together as humanity. Through the trauma we all experienced, why couldn't we join together? But I ask now of this beautiful congregation, have I mentioned how happy I am to see all of you? If the world couldn't unite, maybe we can here. Can we? Maybe the world can't, but we can start right here at our synagogue as a community that is unified in broadening our blessings with the fullness of heart, the richness of the spirit, and the consciousness of mind. And I'd like to use those three spaces, the heart, the spirit, and the mind, to focus in on how we broaden our blessings. Let's start with the heart. The heart is where our feelings reside. The heart is where relationships take place. The heart is at the center of every human being's universe. The ancient rabbis ask why the Ve'ahavta states, "You shall set these words upon the heart." Why, they ask, doesn't the prayer say to set the words in the heart as opposed to upon the heart? The answer, for only when the heart is open can the words enter. The words are placed on top of the heart with the hope that one day the heart will open. COVID in all its horror, from deaths to emotional trauma, from anxiety to quarantine, it is a time for us to open our hearts wide, full, and richly, to allow ourselves to experience more, not less, of what life has to offer. Here's what I suggest we do, and next week, let's check in with each other to see if we did it. There's someone in your life who, for whatever reason, you find to be weirdly connected to, and with whom you want to be in a relationship. However, something happened. Something you may not even remember that caused a rift, a separation, that neither one of you has the guts or willingness to risk being rejected in order to repair the broken relationship. And yet, you stalk them on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, following their every move because you're curious. You hear about their life and you desire to have them join yours. Let us take a risk this season to repair that relationship. Why? Why? Because in so doing, we will broaden our life's blessings by having them in our life rather than not. Broadening your blessings is not easy work. It takes spiritual muscle and fortitude to be able to make such a widening experience possible. In his book, The DNA of Relationships, Gary Smalley states, relationships are not optional. From the moment we're born, we're in relationship with parents, siblings, and other relatives. Soon we're in relationship with other children. Later, we have relationships at school and in the workplace. We develop relationships with close friends. Eventually, most people develop a relationship with someone they deeply love. When a relationship becomes difficult or painful, we tend to dismiss the relationship and may for a while try to abandon all relationships. But inevitably, we come back and seek connection again. Our faith tells us that if a person passes a fruit tree of a fruit they never tasted before, and the person does not taste that tree, then the person has sinned. Judaism never wants us to miss an opportunity to add blessings to our lives. If we don't make every effort in our life to create healing in the broken relationships, that is, where there is potential for healing, then we too have sinned. Yes, I know some relationships are beyond repair, but those that can be repaired are fruits ready to bloom. They are just waiting to be nurtured. Such relationships ought to broaden our blessings if we have the courage to make it so. Let the holy days be the kick we need to broaden our heart with blessings of renewed and repaired relationships. How do we broaden our blessings when it comes to our spirit? the place of faith and spirituality. Another midrash tells of two angels who are sent to earth, each with a basket. One was told to collect all the human requests. I want this and I want that. The other angel with the basket was to gather humanity's prayers of gratitude. The first angel cried and complained of the burden to carry a basket so filled, so heavy, loaded with all those petitions. And the second angel cried too, for his basket was all but empty. Our theme this year is an attempt to get us to fill the basket of gratitude. I began this morning speaking about how lucky we are to have a bed to sleep in. But how many of us pause to actually reflect on that idea? I didn't until I started to write this sermon. And now everything I see, I am appreciating. I'm feeling just filled with immense gratitude each and every day. And here's the thing. Such an approach to life can change one's mood in an instant. Our rabbis have taught it's forbidden to a person to enjoy anything of this world without a blessing. And if anyone enjoys anything of this world without a blessing, he commits a sin too. As one commentator put it, a person embezzles from God when he makes use of this world without uttering a blessing. All a blessing is for us is a recognition of how fortunate we are. The motzi takes us to a place where we appreciate the food we are about to eat. The blessing of our children at the end of the service reminds us of our sacred joy and obligation in raising these human beings. This sermon is not about how to utter such blessings, but rather to recognize them, appreciate them, and to allow our spirit to revel in the goodness with which we have been blessed. Clearly, the word spirituality is derived from the word spirit. A spirit that is challenged, and we've all been there, will have trouble seeing the wonder, joy, and goodness around it. Pushing through the challenge to see the blessing is the work of spirituality. Many centuries ago, there was a police officer, newly graduated, 20 years old. His uniform was immaculate with brass buttons. His sword glinted at his side. But his uniform made him arrogant and gave him a poor perspective on life. He was cruel and callous. On his 20th birthday, full of pride, the pompous officer was on his patrol. He stopped an elderly man along the way. He commanded the man dressed in rags, "Step aside, I'm an officer, step aside." The man would not step aside and instead muttered, "What am I going to do with you?" "Step aside, I command you." The officer drew his sword. And as he advanced towards the old man, he actually stumbled, and the old man reached out to steady him. Unfortunately, the sword flashed, and when the dust cleared, the officer's sword was embedded in the old man, who lay dying. The officer cried out, "Why did you not step aside when I commanded you to do so?" The man in rags waved the words away. "I'm leaving you," he said, "and as I do, I put upon you the curse of blessings." "What do you mean?" asked the officer, now quite confused. "The curse of blessings. Every day you must bless something you have never blessed before. On the day you do not bless something new, on that day you will die." The man in rags closed his eyes. The officer was still confused. He looked around, and when he turned back, the man in rags was gone. He scoffed, "The curse of blessings? Ridiculous!" But then as night fell, the officer fell ill in a way he had never felt before. His limbs felt cold, and he knew somehow that his life was leaving him. He cried out, "You are blessed, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings on the evening." As life returned to him, he realized the curse was real. The next morning, he did not delay. As soon as he awoke, he offered words of blessings. "I am thrilled I'm able to wake up this morning." Each morning, he added a new blessing. He thanked God that he could get out of bed, that he could eat breakfast. He blessed his clothes, his house. He ran out of furniture to bless. So he blessed his relationships, his family, his friends. He started to bless his fellow officers, who until recently had found him to be something of a nasty fellow, but slowly grew to appreciate him in return. The officer had to go farther afield to find things new to blessing. He began to bless strangers, the clerk in the market, and the person who cut ahead of him in line. He must be in a rush. As the years passed, his horizons broadened still further. He retired and traveled the world, blessing its sights and sounds. Each day, his life was renewed. Almost 100 years had passed, and he realized that he was nearing the age of 120. Even Moses did not live longer than that, and he had certainly outlived all of his friends. He resolved that on his birthday, he would review the blessings of his life, but recite no new one. It was time. And review he did. And as evening fell, he felt not a bitter chill, but a coolness falling over him. He did not resist. As twilight fell, a familiar figure appeared beside him. It was the old man in rags from almost 100 years before. "You!" the officer exclaimed. "I've thought about you every day for 100 years. I'm so sorry I harmed you. I know that I must do what's right. Please, let me end my life and forgive me." "You don't understand," said the man in rags. "You don't know who I am, do you? I am an angel who was sent 100 years ago to harvest your soul. But when I looked at you, so pompous and proud, there was nothing there to harvest. An empty uniform was all I saw. So I put upon you the curse of blessings, and now you have become a man who has broadened his blessings each and every day." The officer grasped in an instant all that had happened and why. Overwhelmed, he said, "Thank you, God, for giving me my life and for taking it in its time." The man in rags cried out in frustration, "Now look at what you've done. You're going to live forever." You're going to live forever a life of blessing. Being able to see the blessing in our lives that we often ignore can literally give us new life. Being able to set aside our old ways and look towards a life that is surrounded by things we never even considered, but now realize is a way of being mindful and so very spiritual. Recognizing our blessings will broaden our perspective and make us more appreciative of all that we have. And so how do we finally incline the mind to appreciate the blessings before us? We are all familiar with the phrases losing your mind or changing your mind. What about inclining our mind toward blessing? Our minds today are filled with more information than ever before. The 24-hour news cycle, the constant state of conflict in our politics, the swirl and complete obsession with social media. All these fill up our minds, and there's literally no space left for the goodness that abounds in our mind. So how do we incline our minds so filled with negativity with something more positive? The ancient rabbis suggested that each person is to state 100 blessings a day. They did not necessarily believe that people would actually do this, but they felt it would incline the mind to see goodness and blessing all around. I do want to pause for a moment, for as we focus on broadening our blessings today and throughout the whole year, I do not want any of us to think for a second that we're turning away from the challenges we face as individuals, as a community, and as a country. Quite the opposite. Broadening our blessings is about our perspective on the world and hope that others can enjoy the fortune and goodwill that so many of us do. As Jews, tikkun olam, repairing the world, is as important as seeing all the goodness in the world as well, for they are divinely interconnected. But it is a mindset to be able to see goodness in the face of challenge, to see light through the darkness, truly setting one's mind to appreciate the rose among the thorns. How do we do it? How do we wrap our head around it all? 2 salesmen were sent far away in the early 1900s to assess sales opportunities. These were shoe salesmen, by the way, 2 shoe salesmen. They wired separate telegrams back to their boss. One read, "Situation hopeless. They won't and they don't wear shoes." The other said, "Glorious opportunity. They don't have any shoes yet." The theory of negativity bias tells us that human beings have a proclivity to attend to, learn from, and use negative information far more than positive information. The news we consume always seems to be negative. Human beings often experience multiple good things in one day, but the research shows that we still tend to focus on the one negative thing that took place instead of the multitude of good before us. In his book, Enlightenment Now, Steven Pinker states, an American in 2015, compared with his or her counterpart a half a century earlier, will have lived 9 years longer, have had 3 more years of education, earned an additional $33,000 a year per family member, and have an additional 8 hours of a week of leisure. But if popular impressions are a guide, he says, today's Americans are not 1.5 times happier. People will come back from flights and they'll tell you their story. They're like, it was the worst day of my life. We got on a plane and they made us sit on the runway for 45 minutes. He continues, oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air in a metal tube like a bird? Did you notice that as well? He's asking, what does our mind set to? The weight or the miracle? The pain or the blessing? The ground or the flight? But we are in luck. Our faith is designed to fight against the destructive and focus us to incline our minds to blessing. It is essentially how our whole system is made up. The mitzvah system, the blessing system, it is all to incline our mind in a positive direction, to see good and do good. Today, this high holy day, is a day of decision. What kind of outlook will we have in this year to come? Our tradition answers this question next week in the Torah portion for Yom Kippur. Choose blessing over curse. Choose life over death. It is such a simple message and yet so hard to actualize. But that's why we are here, to refocus, reimagine, and regroup for the year ahead. So let us use our hearts to broaden the blessings of repairing broken relationships, our spirits to recognize the blessings before us that we often take for granted, and let us incline our minds toward the positive instead of the negative. If we do this, our blessings will, with certainty, be broadened. Amen.